The political stage ignited when Representative Elise Stefanik, a high-profile Republican leader, turned her attention toward a controversy brewing in New York politics. Known for her sharp rhetoric and ability to rally conservative audiences, Stefanik labeled Governor Hochul as the worst governor in America. This was not the first time Hochul had faced criticism from Republican ranks, but this attack struck a particularly raw nerve because of its connection to Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, a progressive lawmaker representing Queens. Mamdani, an outspoken advocate of left-wing policies and a prominent voice within the Democratic Socialists of America, had recently gained the governor's tacit support in matters of housing, immigration, and rent regulation. While Hochul's alliance with Mamdani was not an outright endorsement, her unwillingness to distance herself from his progressive agenda gave Stefanik an opening. Stefanik seized it, framing Hochul's cooperation with Mamdani as evidence that she was steering New York further left, ignoring the struggles of everyday working families, and aligning with politicians more radical than the state can handle. Media outlets quickly amplified Stefanik's remarks. Right-leaning platforms celebrated her bluntness, while liberal commentators dismissed it as partisan posturing. Still, the controversy gained traction because Stefanik's comments resonated with a broad frustration among voters: rising housing costs, crime concerns, and economic pressures. Stefanik crafted her message not just as an attack on Hochul but as a warning about what she called the creeping socialist takeover of New York politics. This first wave of criticism set the tone for what would become an ongoing war of words. Hochul's allies dismissed Stefanik's comments as manufactured outrage, while Mamdani himself leaned into the spotlight, defending his positions and insisting that his policies represented the true needs of working-class New Yorkers. Zohran Mamdani's political journey became central to the unfolding feud. Born in Uganda and raised in New York City, Mamdani entered politics with a mission to fight for tenants, immigrants, and marginalized communities. His rhetoric often positioned him against real estate developers, corporate lobbyists, and what he described as the political establishment failing working-class New Yorkers. By 2025, Mamdani had carved out a reputation as one of the most unapologetic progressives in the state legislature. He was a leading advocate for good cause eviction, a bill designed to protect renters from arbitrary evictions and steep rent hikes. His support for Palestinian rights also brought him both praise from activist groups and sharp criticism from political opponents. Governor Hochul, navigating a difficult landscape as she tried to balance moderate and progressive factions within her party, had shown measured willingness to work with Mamdani. While Hochul often avoided fully embracing his proposals, she also refrained from publicly distancing herself. For progressives, this signaled that their voices were being heard. For conservatives like Stefanik, it was proof that Hochul was enabling what they saw as dangerous extremism. Stefanik framed Mamdani as symbolic of everything wrong with New York's governance. She painted him as a socialist radical who puts ideology above the safety and prosperity of families. In her speeches, she emphasized that Hochul's association with Mamdani revealed her poor judgment and betrayal of common-sense leadership. Governor Hochul found herself trapped in the middle of an intensifying political storm. On one side, Elise Stefanik relentlessly hammered her as the worst governor in America, tying her name to every controversial proposal coming from Zohran Mamdani and his progressive allies. On the other, Hochul faced pressure from within her own Democratic base to show greater solidarity with lawmakers like Mamdani, who represented a new wave of progressive activism sweeping across New York. Hochul had long positioned herself as a pragmatic moderate. Since taking office after Andrew Cuomo's resignation, she had sought to unify Democrats across ideological divides. Yet, her leadership style, calculated and cautious, often left both sides unsatisfied. Progressives accused her of being too slow to embrace bold reforms, while conservatives claimed she was enabling far-left ideas. The Mamdani controversy sharpened these criticisms. Housing affordability, immigration policy, and public safety were among the most urgent issues in New York, and Hochul's perceived closeness to Mamdani gave her opponents a target. Stefanik argued that Hochul's willingness to lend cover to radicals showed she was unfit to govern. Behind closed doors, Hochul's team debated how to respond. Some advisors urged her to draw a firm line against Mamdani's most controversial stances, particularly his outspoken criticism of U.S. foreign policy. Others insisted that alienating progressives would weaken her base and energize primary challengers. In public, Hochul chose a middle path. She defended her record on housing and immigration, stressing that she was open to all voices at the table. At the same time, she avoided directly endorsing Mamdani's more radical proposals. Her strategy was to appear as a unifier, but in practice, it left her vulnerable to attacks from both left and right. Media coverage painted Hochul as embattled, with headlines questioning whether she could maintain her grip on power. Stefanik capitalized on this perception, launching fundraising appeals that framed Hochul as the symbol of democratic mismanagement. Meanwhile, Mamdani doubled down on his grassroots organizing, holding rallies and town halls that drew large crowds of renters and activists. For Elise Stefanik, the feud with Hochul was more than a state-level skirmish, it was a stepping stone in her larger political ambitions. As the third-ranking Republican in the House and a close ally of Donald Trump, Stefanik was increasingly seen as a rising star in the GOP. Her attacks on Hochul and Mamdani gave her a platform to showcase herself as a fighter against progressive overreach, while also keeping her name in national headlines. Stefanik's political strategy was calculated. By branding Hochul the worst governor in America, she wasn't just speaking to New Yorkers, she was addressing conservatives across the country who had grown disillusioned with Democratic leadership in blue states. Crime statistics, high taxes, and stories of people leaving New York for cheaper states were common talking points in Republican circles, and Stefanik skillfully tied these narratives to Hochul's governorship. Her speeches were carefully crafted to resonate with working and middle-class voters. She spoke about rising grocery prices, small businesses struggling under heavy regulations, and families afraid of crime in urban neighborhoods. Each point was delivered with sharp contrasts. Hochul and Mamdani represented elitist ideology, while she, Stefanik, claimed to represent common-sense solutions. National media took notice. Conservative outlets gave her prime airtime, praising her for taking the fight directly to Democrats. Even mainstream networks covered the feud, recognizing it as part of a larger national divide between moderates, progressives, and conservatives. Political analysts speculated that Stefanik was positioning herself for a possible vice presidential role or even a presidential run-in. The future. While Hochul hesitated and Stefanik attacked, Zohran Mamdani seized the opportunity to strengthen his political identity. Far from retreating in the face of Republican criticism, Mamdani leaned into the controversy, using it to amplify his message and energize his supporters. Mamdani framed Stefanik's attacks as proof that his policies were threatening entrenched powers. At rallies in Queens and across New York City, he reminded tenants that the fight for affordable housing was not about partisan games but about keeping families in their homes. His good cause eviction bill became a rallying cry, with grassroots organizations distributing flyers, hosting workshops, and organizing tenant unions. He also sharpened his critique of Hochul, accusing her of playing politics rather than committing to real reform. "We don't need half measures," he declared at one event. "We need a government that chooses people over profits." These words resonated deeply with his base, especially young progressives who felt disillusioned by centrist Democrats. Mamdani's growing profile, however, came at a cost. Conservative media portrayed him as a dangerous radical, citing his positions on policing, immigration, and foreign policy. They highlighted his support for Palestinian rights as evidence of anti-American extremism, a framing that Stefanik echoed in her speeches. Yet, Mamdani turned even this into fuel. In interviews, he argued that his critics feared the power of grassroots movements. "When politicians attack me," he said, "they are attacking the millions of New Yorkers who demand dignity, fairness, and justice." His defiance inspired his supporters but also forced Hochul into an uncomfortable position. As governor, she needed to balance the demands of progressives with the expectations of moderates and independents. The more Mamdani gained influence, the harder it became for Hochul to avoid taking a clear stance.